Eli asked me to come and talk and just kind of talk about some experiences in a context that's just really a couple blocks from here. I study at the University of Memphis. I study rhetoric in the communication world mostly, and have begun to zero in on race, religion, and rhetoric. There's a professor there that's kind of getting that off the ground as a particular program for us. And it's become kind of this combination. For me, I wouldn't have dreamed when I was a kid that I would be in a PhD program. And there's a long story to how I ended up where I did, but what the program allowed me to do was to test drive the program before I ever was admitted or applied, just to take a course. And I walked in my first night. I was going to take a rhetoric course on Martin Luther King. And that just seemed like a great thing for someone with my interests to test drive. The first guy that I meet was this guy named Tom, who is a pastor. And in the back of my mind, I was wondering, I'd been wanting to do a PhD in theology, and I also wanted to stay here, so how was I going to study theology and proceed? So I found this course on King. That seemed like a good deal. I walk in, the first guy I meet is named Tom, who is a pastor at a church in town, who was also taking a class this semester. He's just a year ahead of me. He said, yeah, this is a great place for people like us who want to do ministry. Nothing is more important in many ways in ministry than communication and thinking about what words mean to ourselves and other people. And so through that and several other things, it was very clear to me that this was my next step in life. To go to a place to study with people that don't look like me, don't think like me, don't have my same background. Even in the Christian world, of those who are Christian, I'm the only us in the room. There used to be a couple of others, but they've since gone on to other things. They've finished the program. But then, as you'll hear shortly, there are non-believers of different kinds of stripes. There are Muslims, there are spiritualists, New Age kind of folks in our program, and we all show up in class and we hash it out every week, and it's just a fascinating experience. So I've been in the program a couple of years now. I'm about halfway through my coursework. I'm taking my course this semester is on race, religion, and rhetoric. I'll go tonight for my 3-hour class there tonight. But I want to talk to you basically about 3 things that have kind of matured or been in process for me since being in the program. Things that I don't know that I could have thought about in the same way otherwise. In my experiences, my theology, and just how I process the world. And maybe they'll be helpful for you. When I was first asked to speak in African American History Month, my first thought was, I don't seem like the demographic to be speaking here. However, I'm studying race because as my classmates who are African American will tell me and hold me accountable for, it is more likely that people who don't like them will listen to me than will listen to them. And I have to take that seriously. I have to take that very seriously. Not because God requires that of me and because they expect that of me. That's something that I have to do. So the first thing that has kind of come to the forethought for me is privilege. And there's this, my background, I grew up in rural West Tennessee, a little north of here on a farm. We grew up poor. I realized my kids had never had a pork rind last week. And that was breakfast growing up sometimes, okay, in my world. And so I went to the store, they were $1, and got them some and made sure they had that experience. Because if you're a Woods, you just have to have that experience, okay? So I grew up in rural West Tennessee as a poor farm family. And now I am in this place where you can go as far as you can go in education. And that feels odd to me. I wrestle with that a lot. But there's this place in Joshua chapter 1 that has really popped out to me. I teach 9th grade Bible down the hill. And there's this one little section, and Joshua's complicated. People read it differently, different ways, and I'm aware of that. There's this one part that every time I read it, it's convicting to me, especially based on my experience now as a PhD student studying race and rhetoric and religion. We start with the Israelites that are about to cross the Jordan and enter the rest of the promised land. I say the rest of because 2.5 tribes are already actually on their plots of land on the eastern side of the Jordan. So Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh are already home. And really, if they wanted to, they could have stayed home and got their Pinterest boards and how they want to set up their houses ready and start going to town and going to, all the places and get their furniture and all that stuff. But here's what Joshua says you have to do. He says, any of your fighting men need to cross the river first and fight for your tribe mates. Any of your fighting men need to cross the river and fight for the people that aren't home yet. So I sit in a class every week with people who are less at home than I am. Okay, I grew up poor, but because I look the way I look, I know I have access to some powers that they don't. I know there are people that don't believe that, but my experience affirms that over and over and over again that I do. My name, my skin tone offers me some privileges. I'm more at home, or I can be. So it was easier for me to move out of poverty into a PhD program than some of my classmates. So I found this, we were reading a couple of weeks ago in our class, and the focus was James Cone. I know he can be controversial in the Christian world, but I really don't think this quote can be anything but gospel truth. He said, I find that the white-skinned person is worried too much about their own salvation rather than about the liberation of the black community. I don't think you should separate liberation and salvation. I think they are cohesively connected. But I think there could be some truth there sometimes if we're not paying attention. Some people don't care about Jesus until they're free. And that's fair. That's fair. And so the challenge for me has been, what does it mean to be the person who is more at home and now is charged with fighting ahead of my classmates? Not fighting from their perspective, but fighting for their perspective. I can't fight from their perspective. I can never be African American. I can never be a Muslim woman. I can never be any of those experiences. That's not who I am. But I can fight for them. Their liberation matters, and it's connected to salvation. And so privilege has come to the forefront for me for quite a while now, from the text and from my experience in the PhD program. Which is why, by the way, that Wendell Berry has been kind of the convergence of a lot of burdens for me. As someone who grew up in this kind of agrarian area, he is someone who is an incredible mind who talks like my people. And my people need some incredible minds speaking on their behalf. But he also wrote this book about race that I haven't seen many people study his perspectives on race yet. That's where I want to go, is that area, since no one has done it, and I'm interested in race. There's a book called The Hidden Wound, where he processes what does race mean for us from the ground up, from an agrarian perspective. And so I'm called, I think, to understand an agrarian perspective on race, how place matters to the discussion of race. And my privilege and my conviction as a Christian demand that I go to that place. The scary thing about going to that place is there are people that don't like you to go to that place. And I know anytime that topic comes up, people get a little antsy and get a little worried about where it's going to go. And I never know where it's going to go. But hopefully it'll go where God takes it. But I'm called to that. The second thing, first thing is privilege. The second thing is dignity. I teach junior Bible as well down the hill. I've taught that for a few years now. We read through Acts quite a bit. And there's this scene in Acts that haunts me over and over and over again, especially when I see news pieces, particularly about race and police interaction. And I know that can be a touchy subject. But again, what I have to study, we just study all the touchy subjects and we just get used to it. Okay, so let me just say first, there are wonderful cops. Amen. Yes, Lord, let it be. But there's also a system that we all know is broken, and there are problems there too, okay? There's the tension. All right, so I'll just put that out there. But in Acts 16, Paul himself experiences something that's very significant. He's arrested for doing something in a previous chapter that I don't necessarily have time to go into now, but he's not arrested for anything that's particularly heinous. He did a good thing, and he took a fall for it. While he's in jail, an earthquake releases him from jail. Before he was released, though, he was flogged. And this is where things get hairy. Because he's a Roman citizen. And there was no trial before he was flogged. And as a Roman citizen, that is a no-no. That's not something that's supposed to happen. So when he is released, two very interesting things happened. The guard was about to take his own life because he was very concerned about how the system was then going to treat him as the guard in this scenario where a prisoner had escaped. And Paul, seeing this man, wants to dignify him. He has grace on him, knowing that he's as much a victim of the system as Paul is. This man is terrified enough of the system to take his own life and rather to fight against the system that he is in. And Paul says, no, don't. I'm here. Don't do that. And he has this dignity and this grace for this guard, which I think our faith very much teaches. However, after that, Paul could have made a break for it, right? He could have vanished. He could have got out of there real quick, but he doesn't. Instead, what he does is he says, I want you to go get your magistrate, and I want you to bring him here, and I want to put a mirror up to his face and say, this is what you've done to one of your own. I'm one of your citizens, and this is how you treated me. So I want you to look in a mirror and acknowledge that there's something wrong here. And you're going to walk me out of it. I mean, that's the boldest thing. Like, that's, I don't have that. I don't know if I have that within me. But that's bold, right? To face the system, to put a mirror up to it and say, look at yourself and what you're doing to your own. And so, one of the things that I leave pretty much every week thinking is, how in the world do people who are sharp minds in this room with me have to function every day in a world that doesn't dignify them as much as me? And my responsibility, not from their perspective, but from mine, is to work in the same way Paul is, in saying to the system, when it is broken, look at yourself. We got to do something different here. We have to speak that kind of truth as best we can, while also dignifying the people who are also caught up in the same system as the officers. The last thing, this is the one that I'm in process on, so I'm just going to give you my ponderings. I have no answers, but that's what we're here for in this place, right? Maybe you'll write the research paper on this and give it to me one day. 2 weeks ago in class, we spent about 2.5 hours talking about forgiveness. Now, we talk about forgiveness theologically here, and that's incredible, but I had never thought of forgiveness and the struggle with the rhetoric of forgiveness, how we talk about forgiveness in our culture from another person's perspective than my own. So we looked at, what we had to do was read an article that looked at the Washington Post. The Washington Post has this fascinating collection of scripts from interviews of African American and Caucasians after kind of shootings that are well known in the media. Okay, so it would be people, African Americans, who have been interviewed after one of their own has been killed by a white man, usually, or it would be interviews with from white people whose significant loved one has been killed by a black person. And these aren't op-eds, this isn't opinion pieces, this is just the scripts. And the guy that was writing the article just went through the scripts and quantified the research on how often people were asked to forgive in those scenarios. And what they said was, and I left my stats at home, and then it was sleeting, and I didn't get to go home and get the exact numbers, but maybe just believe me. The significant imbalance is toward very soon after a shooting, a reporter asking African Americans, will you forgive the shooter? And only 3 times was a white person asked that same question in all of their database that they had for that year. that says something. I don't know what all it says, but it says something rhetorically and theologically about where we are as people. And here's the thing that they said about that. As I listened to my African American brothers and sisters in that room, what they were saying is, how can you ask someone to forgive when the body's not even in the grave yet, and we haven't had a chance to even feel the emotions of grief and anger yet? We're still waiting for the burial to happen. How do we even know what we are forgiving of if we haven't experienced the hurt and the anger of injustice yet? And my professor said, and I don't know what to do with this, I'm just throwing this out there. One of the fascinating things he said was, on the cross, Jesus didn't say, I forgive you, you don't know what you do. He said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, right? I don't know what to do with that, but I know in that moment of hurt, Jesus wasn't saying, I'm forgiving you verbally, maybe by implication, yes. But he does know forgiveness needs to be in the picture. But he doesn't bring those words from himself to the people. He brings them from the Father. In that moment, he's hurt. My God, why is this happening? Why have you forsaken me? Are his words. He's feeling the pain of injustice. And forgiveness will come later, of course, in some wonderful ways. So, these are some of the things that when you study with people who don't look like you, who are very sharp, very curious, who may or may not have a faith element, but certainly are looking for liberation. These are the things that kind of come to my mind every week. These are the things I leave and go home and stare at a wall for a few hours and just think about life with. But I wouldn't give it up for anything. I just wanted to leave you with a couple of suggestions, maybe, as just from the ponderings today, if they're helpful. So, maybe just some suggestions for you as you study here in this place. One suggestion that I might offer you is this. When you write papers, when you're reading for your classes, maybe sometimes go somewhere on Lamar Avenue instead of the library to do those things. What you're reading and what you're writing will take on a whole different context and feel, and maybe even burden and value if you're writing in a context that's not quite your own. When you read the Psalms, maybe go read them in front of Tulane Poplar instead of your church office. I guarantee you the words will do something to you in a different way and mean something contextually and more profoundly in some ways. Of course, read them for your church body, but read them for 201. There are people that need liberation, and they won't care about our claims of salvation until they experience some form of liberation. Because that's what love might look like to them. That's a language they can understand. So I hope, as you hear a white man standing before you on African American History Month, that you understand that we got a lot of work to do, that the gospel demands it of us, that there are systems, there are principalities and powers that still have to fall and take a knee. And unless we're willing to do the work to dignify and hold up mirrors to those powers, those are going to prolong themselves and replicate themselves for longer periods of time. So you have the amazing opportunity with the knowledge of grace and dignity and image of God-bearingness that you have to be the people that dignify, to speak into systems, to work for justice because of the gospel and not in spite of it, and for people who desperately need people that look like everybody in this room right now to do so. Let's pray. Father God, we are a people that I believe anybody who is in this room right now, who works in this place, who studies in this place, is seeking what your will is and how to do it. And it's imperfect, and we always are, but you take mustard seeds and move mountains. And so God, for us in this room who might have just a little bit more privilege than some in the world, God, may we go before our brothers and sisters who need us to fight for them, who need us to fight in justice systems for them, fight in law courts, in hospitals, in churches, at coffee shops. May we do the uncomfortable things that your word requires of us in our privilege. God, we want to be a people who are dignified, and so may we dignify those who are not. And when they are not, may we hold up a mirror to the systems or to the individuals who will not do so and show them what that looks like. To show them what power looks like when it's abused and mistreated in the face of fear. And what the kingdom of God looks like and being a citizen in that as opposed to Rome. God, what does it mean to forgive? What does it mean to know that injustice is and to still feel that grief, but to know that one day forgiveness is an option? We want to know what that means in our system and in our churches and in our individual lives. And so God, give us wisdom. Show us what that means. Make this moment one in which we hold a mirror up to ourselves maybe and start there and ask where we are in a pursuit of your justice and your righteousness and your love and your liberation and your salvation. Teach us what all of that means, God, and may we act on it as we learn. And it's through your Son we pray. Amen.
Amen.